This is what Assessment Objective 3 is all about. But as well as visual recordings, so anything that's a drawing or photograph or a sketch, we need to focus on the evidence that shows recording in written forms.
Here is an example of 2 sketchbook pages without any annotation, just a set and series of observational studies of organic forms. The observational studies include technical drawings, more experimental mark-making drawings focusing on line and different applications of marks using pencil. And in this study, the focus was on a single use of colour, which then progressed on to an interest in the negative space of the objects rather than the positive space of the objects. The drawings themselves would show an examiner a clear piece of evidence for recording observationally and visually, but would not give an examiner any indication of what the thoughts were behind the work and what the student had planned to do next. One of the first steps for annotating your work is to be clear about illustrating what the actual work is, even if it seems obvious and simple for you. Including titles and clear labelling gives an examiner straightforward indication about what your ideas are based on. To start this process off, I would always use a pencil to mark out and plan where a title will go, and then go over that with any penwork lettering on top of the pencil. Although seemingly quite simple, these 2 titles now give an examiner or anybody looking at my work a very clear demonstration of what I'm interested in. I'll now consider what I'm going to write as an annotation to further explain and narrate what my work is about. Because these drawings are mainly focusing on mark making and observational work, I'm going to discuss my use of line to start with, and I'll use some of the sentences that I've put together here to write my annotations nearby my work. For this annotation, I used notes on the line, form and tone support sheets to help me write a rough draft of what I wanted to say about this drawing. I then decided how I was going to write the information down. One way is to write it directly onto your work, and you could write that in any of the space around. I personally don't favour that way and prefer to make tags or folding sheets that can be simply stuck, sellotaped, stapled or sewn onto pages. In this example, I took a sketchbook page out and then I simply popped it through the spiral bound of my sketchbook. But if you're not working in a sketchbook, you can simply staple the note in afterwards. You'll notice that I've also written this in pencil so that any mistakes that I might make, like the ones you see down here, can then be worked in pen and I can rub the pencil out once I'm done. So what I've written here is that from first-hand observation of the arranged fruit, I drew the objects using a single colour pencil. I've produced a technical study focusing on the forms of the fruit, and I've tried to use tonal shading to show the organic curving dimensions of the pear and the fabric folds. I became more interested in the negative space, and I've decided to work around the shapes instead. This last little bit of the annotation is a real key bit of information for the examiner, because if I do decide to take the shapes of the grapes any further, developing them into an image, I have included that as an intention here, which I will then get marks for. I've now rubbed out the pencil writing and written over it in pen, and as I was writing in pen I decided to add a few more details, so that's another advantage to writing in pencil first, that you can add more information in as you're thinking about it when you're writing your rough draft up. So moving over towards these more experimental drawings, because they're experiments and they're not as finished as another drawing that I might do, I decided to write these annotations in between my drawings. I've used the writing support sheets again just to talk through my work. Annotating is basically always about narrating through your work. It's almost like writing a script for your examiner just to see and read what you were thinking at the time of doing your work. So up here I've written almost like an introduction to these pieces of work, talking through how I've experimented with different types of mark making techniques that explore the line, tone and texture seen in these organic forms. I used a continuous line drawing process as well as hatching and squiggles to achieve a different effect to the more technical drawing style below. In between my drawings, I've then described the lines and shapes. I think they're quite busy and scribbly, so I've put that thought, that idea down in words. And I've said that these lines can be quite heavy, like this example, or they can be quite wispy and delicate, like this. This piece of work lifts up, and I've carried on writing that this type of drawing could be developed into an inky painting, and I could explore the hatched and scratchy lines more. And then I had another idea as I was writing that the continuous line drawing style could also be developed by experimenting with stitch and sewing into fabric. Because I've got this space available, I may well do those ideas now and stick that work next to my previous annotations. That gives my examiner clear evidence that I am thinking about what I might do next, what I was interested in, how I went about exploring it, and then finally, what will happen next. Underneath this example of the technical drawing, next to my previous experimental drawings, and where the annotations are written about what I might do next, I then went on to explore and experiment with the scratchy line using ink and a nib and ink and a brush in a rather random, quite expressive linear drawing and set of organic forms. I had previously suggested that I might do that with this annotation, but even if I hadn't explored these drawings and experimented further with both the scratchy line and additional materials, it's important that my examiner does see that I'm thinking about what I could do next. Having done those drawings, I then continued to write an annotation describing the work, what the result was, and also talking about what I like. I like this experimental loose way of working because the outcome is less predictable. I've listed my materials at the bottom of this piece of work, and what this annotation suggests is that I might go on to do work that is perhaps a little more unpredictable, abstract, or unusual to look at. Once again though, if I don't decide to do this, I'm still just expressing my thoughts through this annotation at this current point, which is clear evidence of assessment objective number 3, where I need to show written recording as well as visual recording, sharing my observations, ideas and insights so that my examiner can see a fluent journey across my work throughout my portfolio. This is just one example of how annotation, written notes and comments will really help boost your work.